Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First, I have to confess something. I'm not a STEM expert. And so when the organizers asked me to give the final keynote, I was a little bit reluctant because I thought, I have all these, the best STEM experts in the world in the room, and I don't really feel up to the task. But for some reason, they decided to have me anyway, so here I am. And this morning, when I listened to certain things this morning, I was a little bit reassured because of, just give you a few hints. One was, I read in the paper that we endorsed that one of the foundation was Jean Piaget's approach of, and I did my PhD in Geneva University, education and psychology, and my PhD supervisor was actually a student of Jean Piaget, because I'm quite old, you see, so it was many years ago. And so I had almost direct access to the source, right, of constructivism. So that was when I thought, okay, so I'm sort of a known kind of ground. That was one thing. The second thing is I heard a lot about complexity and systemic view, transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and so on perspective, and that's a lot what is really been concerning me. And so I will just tell you a few things about the path that led me here, that led me to do what I do. I see some people are worried now because when an old man starts telling his life story, that's a bad start. Hey, I've got a plane to catch tonight. Okay, I'll keep it short. So I really started out as an educator. My first job, I was a teacher in a high school in Germany, actually. And then I moved on and did many things in the field of education, but then I moved to the International Committee of the Red Cross, which is the part of the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement that works in war zones and natural catastrophe, but specifically war zone. ICRC is really focused on war zones. So I spent quite a lot of time in conflict areas of the world, and that really had a very deep impact on me for several reasons. But one of the reasons was that I realized the interconnectedness between conflicts, natural catastrophes, climate change, so that and I really realized you cannot, education, and you cannot really address only one thing at a time as if there were silos, because they are constantly in interaction, right? So, for instance, when I was in Darfur, at the height of the conflict, so I was really puzzled because, you know, most of the wars happen in oil-rich areas, right? If you look at the oil map and you look at the conflict maps, somehow there's a lot of connection, either oil transport, like, you know, pipelines, or oil production, things like that. But in Darfur, nothing. South Sudan, yeah, they have oil. Darfur, nothing. So why would people fight over Darfur? Well, Darfur was one of the first water wars. Yeah, it's always been a bit a scarce resource. But with climate change, it became very scarce. And then you had two communities living there, you know, like people having cattle, herders, and you had agriculturists, so farmers, and both need water. And when the water gets scarce, then tension rises. But then, of course, it's not only between two people, then you have international interest and weapons dealer and all the rest of it. So everything gets mixed up. Just to say that education doesn't happen in a vacuum. Education happens in a societal context. And if we want to have a real change in the educational system, we have to look at the whole system in which this educational system is set up. Thank you. So, no, sorry, I'm not finished yet. but if it was enough, I'm happy to go. Okay. Okay, it worked. So, I'm going to start by speaking about the overall concept, because that's what led me to go to Bhutan. This experience that I had through my experience in the International Committee of the Red Cross, that actually we had to look at the full picture, and the systemic dimensions had to be addressed. And this is the fourth king of Bhutan. When he was 17 years old, he ascended the throne. Jigme Singye Wanchuk is his name. And it sounds like a fairy tale. You know, once upon a time, there was a young prince beyond 7 mountains and 7 oceans, and like that. Well, that's him. But he was a very special young man because he realized something that very few leaders realize. He realized he didn't know what he should do. And he went around listening to people. So listening is a skill that is not very spread among leaders, so-called leaders. Yeah? Leaders, they are the ones who say and talk. But who listens? Who listens to the people? Who listens to what are the real needs? Well, he did. And after traveling around the country for 2 years, mostly walking because there was hardly a road in the 70s, early 70s, 72, he ascended the throne. Then he came back and said, well, this is very complex, you know? So many people want so many different things. But in the end, what's the common denominator? It's quite simple. Everybody would like to be happy. Everybody would like their loved ones to be happy. Everyone would like their loved ones to be free of suffering. So let's put happiness and well-being at the center of my, whoops, that's what, too fast.
G&H,
okay.
or gross national
That's the Prime Minister of Bhutan.
Is the philosophy that had guided Bhutan's development process for about now 40 years. It is based on the belief that development must serve a purpose, that development's role is not simply to promote continuous and limitless economic growth, which is what GDP or the conventional economic models tend to do. And that again, within a finite environment, within a finite world, there are bounds within which growth can take place. Natural, social, resources, and so forth. And so G&H is based on the belief that development must be human-centered, and that its objective must be to create those conditions that will enable the human individual to achieve what is most important to him. And that happens to be happiness. And then again, happiness, we believe, is a condition that can be attained when one is able to balance the needs of the body with those of the mind, the physical and the mental needs being balanced. And likewise, the balance between the spiritual needs of the human individual and the material needs. And so it is a human-centered, holistic, sustainable, and inclusive development approach. Now more and more people who are dissatisfied with the result of pursuing an economic development that is no longer seen to be sustainable, they are seeing G&H as an alternative development paradigm.
So this speech, or it was an interview, was held in 2011, and at that time the Kingdom of Bhutan sponsored a UN resolution in July 2011 called Happiness and Wellbeing Towards a New Development Paradigm. And so that was a speech, an interview that was done in this context, and that's Prime Minister Tinley presenting that at the UN. And in 2012, there was a so-called high-level meeting where the question was asked, okay, so if we want to include indicators of well-being in the way we measure development, how shall we do that practically? So that was in May 2012, and that was actually the beginning of my work at the GNH Center Bhutan. I had been hired by Prime Minister Tinley to help develop these programs that were aimed also at education. This was the report that was written by 70 experts as a conclusion of the after this high-level meeting, a group of 70 experts were convened, and over 2 years they wrote this report that you can still find on the internet, Happiness and Well-being Towards a New Development Paradigm. It also has a chapter on education, and this report was actually one of the documents that that was used to define the 17 SDGs. The report started by showing how a lot of the problems that we're facing today as a mankind are actually systemic problems that are connected with an understanding of development that is extremely one-sided, that has put economic growth and material values as almost the only goal of development, instead of realizing that economic growth, capital, material development are just a tool, are just a means to an end, the end being happiness and well-being for everyone and for all life forms. So the idea that it seems to be a small difference, but it's a huge shift when you say economic development serves happiness and well-being, or economic development is a goal in itself, right? And so what the fourth king of Bhutan had said, he said, he was interviewed by a journalist, and the journalist was a little bit sort of, sarcastic. Bhutan is a tiny country, squeeze between India and China, huge, two giants in Asia, and then you have this tiny little country. So, come on, it's not really serious. But what's your GDP anyway? And the king answered, to me, gross national happiness is more important than gross national product. And that's very interesting, because again, it shifts the focus. Yeah, of course we need growth. And in the 70s, Bhutan was a part of the least developed countries in the world. And it had to modernize and develop, but not at all costs. Because if you keep in mind that what you want to achieve is happiness and well-being, happiness for all people, well-being for all life forms, which is a very Buddhist kind of idea, like all life forms have the right for happiness, for well-being, not only the humans, right? It's not seen as a pyramid, but as a circle. Not ego awareness, but eco-awareness, ecosystem awareness. We are part of the whole, of the web of life. But then if we say we want to replace GDP with GNH, gross national happiness, you cannot replace an indicator system and a measurement tool with an ideal. You need to replace it with another measurement system. And that's how the gross national happiness index was developed, 9 domains, and with a number of indicators and 150-something variables. And so I won't go into that, but just to know that that's the idea behind it, that if you decide that you want to stir your country or your city or your organization or your school in a certain direction, you need to have the right indicators. And a few of you spoke about indicators this morning. And that's an idea that we absolutely embrace in gross national happiness. And we also made the effort to see how do the 9 domains of gross national happiness correlate with the 17 SDGs. And it's very interesting because there are two of the indicators where we didn't find a correlation. One is time use, which we believe is a very important indicator of well-being. A lot of the stress and burnout and mental diseases are linked with this feeling, no time, too much to do, running after my life. And of course, with our devices, it has become worse. So slowing down and coming back to oneself and taking time to reflect has become an incredible luxury. But there's nothing directly connected with that in the SDGs, and psychological well-being or inner well-being doesn't also appear, while we believe that happiness and well-being has really two components. One is a conducive environment with the right kind of conditions that enable people to flourish and develop, but there are also the inner dimensions. Yeah? And of course, education plays a big role. Do we equip our kids with the inner competencies, capabilities to face life in such a way that they are stable, they feel good, and you all know the problems that we have in schools with bullying and all the rest of it. I'll speak a bit about that later. So one important dimension of G&H is care for the environment. It's like the foremost dimension of it. Why? Because if this is destroyed, well, we can stop speaking about all the rest, right? It's a very ecosystem out of which we live. And it has really two dimensions. The problems with the environment, one, it has really a personal impact, this disconnection between humans and nature, especially of kids with nature, really has a very powerful negative impact on children. I read a research recently where they asked kids living in the suburbs of big cities about milk. And a significant number of kids didn't know that milk came from a cow. They thought, yeah, milk is like, like Coke or something. You make it in a factory and then comes out in a brick. And many kids didn't know that fish sticks are actually an animal originally swimming in the ocean. So somehow, it's man-made, machine-made, something. Yeah? So that's the extent of disconnection. And how can we expect that a generation that grew up by and large disconnected from their natural environment would care for something they don't know? You cannot care for something you don't know, right? If you have no connection with it, you don't care for it. If we care for something, it means we have a heart connection with something. Therefore, we care. We care for our loved ones because we know them, we love them. We care for our friends because of our connection. But if we don't know the nature, why should we care for it, right? So what is the right balance between the right understanding, scientific and so on, and the right care, which is more heart connection, right? So I really believe we need both, because the science we've had for a long time. Club of Rome started saying, careful, careful, careful. Nothing has happened, or very little. So we know, but we don't do, right? How come we all collectively create results that nobody wants? I don't think many people wake up in the morning saying, hey, today I'm going to destroy the planet. Kind of, the mean guy in James Bond, with his cat, like, I mean, people are not like that, even if they're CEOs or presidents or whatever, And yet, collectively, we create results that nobody wants. So what is this disconnect between understanding? We have all the data, the GIEC reports, and many of you, I'm sure, have produced tons of totally relevant and reliable data, but it's not implemented. There's a disconnect. And between head and hand, there's the heart. So I believe we need also to address this. So, things like that we all know. But do we take it seriously? That we're actually overexploiting our planet? Or do we need something that touches our heart a little more?
we have the courage to face the realities of our time and allow ourselves to feel deeply enough that it transforms us and our future? Come with me on a journey through the eye of beauty. Across an ocean of grief. And beyond.
Yeah. So, as it was mentioned this morning, there's an awakening happening in the new generation, and as an elder person, on one hand, I'm happy about it, and I'm also deeply ashamed that we let it up to them to clean the mess that we've done. These are for my grandchildren with my wife that went to a climate march in Switzerland just a short time ago. And again, I think it's really touching that, you know, my grandchildren, they're fully engaged in it. But as it was said this morning, once they have the emotion, they need to have the understanding and the tools and know-how. Yeah? Because the emotion alone will lead them to despair if they don't know what they can do about it. So the emotion is great because it gives a strong energy, yeah, a strong impulse. But then they need to have the understanding and the tools so that they don't feel helpless. So I really believe that we need to rethink the educational system, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, so I won't take too long to do that, to speak about that. But this being said, we have to see the educational system within the larger social system, as we spoke before. Therefore, to have a sustainable change in our educational system, we also have to challenge in a much more holistic way the very one-sided current development paradigm that sees people as resources for the economy and nature as resources for the economy, human resources, natural resources. But it's not like that. It's about people, and the economy should be serving us, and we should be the caretakers of the planet. And for the time being, by and large, our educational system does not fulfill this task. Why? Because it's, by and large, an inheritance from the 19th century. It hasn't really made the shift from the reality that, or from the fact that in the 19th century, or until half of the 20th century, information was very scarce. So you had to really try to get as much as you could during the years you were in school. Now, every kid with a smartphone has access to more information than there were in the biggest libraries just decades ago. So it's not about scarcity of information, it's about what do we do with all this information? How do we make the difference between useful, authentic, true information, just, you know, the noise? But we don't really teach that yet, right? And in a factory setting, when you are producing industrial goods, quality is equal conformity, because you want each part of the engine to have exactly the right size. If your screw doesn't fit, then you have a problem. So quality is conformity, and by and large, our examination system, assessments are the same. Quality is conformity, everybody the same. But humans are not machines. And it's not about conformity, it's about allowing the uniqueness of every child to be able to manifest, not just conformity, right? And we're preparing them, so there's always the outcry, education should be aligned with the job market, We have no idea what the job market in 10 years or 15 years will be. A lot of the professions that are today will not exist anymore. So we cannot prepare them in a narrow-minded, okay, that they, this and that. They have to be a very broad ability to be able to deal with the unexpected, with the unknown, with the complexity, and so on and so forth. So it's a very different thing than, conditioning them to fit into a system that will most probably not be around anymore when they enter the job market. And I will leave the PISA for now. Yeah. So that's what a factory used to look like. Sometimes still looks like that, not so often anymore. That's what a classroom used to look like, pretty much the same. And it still pretty much looks the same. I teach a lot in Vietnam. We have 50 kids per class, one teacher, and it's like that, Very little interaction, very little opportunity to be creative or to come up with a different idea. You repeat what the teacher says, and then after, if you're not too stupid, you realize, okay, the only thing I have to do is have to tell him what he wants to hear, and then I'm good, right? But that's not helpful. We just conform. We don't develop, right? And we know from research that, I think we were speaking about this with Natalie this morning, when I was a student, I was taught that the brain develops until you're like 18, 20, 21, and then you have to live with that. Now we know that it's not like that. What stops at that age is the biological development of the brain. But then we can continue. But then it doesn't happen alone. We have to do something about it, right? Because brain plasticity doesn't have a limit. We are still using only a small part of what the brain can do. Yeah? But are we teaching or enabling the kids to develop in such a way that this inner mobility, plasticity, creativity, life force is there, or are we just sort of, you all know that, kids start school, they're so eager to learn. They love learning. More often than not, after a few years, that's pretty much gone. And that's a kind of a sin, right? Okay, so, did I miss something? No, I didn't. Okay, so let me go to Happy Schools. So, it was actually UNESCO Asia Pacific, their office is in Bangkok, who did a research, and that brings us back to PISA. It was mentioned this morning, many of the Asian countries have very high PISA scores. Singapore, South Korea, Japan, China, you name it, very high PISA scores. But when you go and look at the well-being of the students, it's very bad. A lot of burnout, a lot of depression, sleeplessness, even suicide, right? So we want to measure educational system with PISA. Every education minister is incredibly happy if the PISA score has gone up, but actually it doesn't reflect the well-being of the students. In the same way, then GDP growth doesn't reflect the well-being of the population. Yeah, the US has had a constantly raising GDP, enormously raising GDP in the past decades. But when you look at all the studies, the happiness and well-being of the population has been at best stagnant, if not declining. Hence, no, I won't say that. Okay. So, a little video on G&H, and then I will connect it to G&H in education, happiness in education. This is Bhutan.
The message that I'd like to share about gross national happiness is that it's not just about Bhutan, and that it's not just about happiness in a very superficial way. It's really about the deep-seated causes of happiness and well-being that come from living in harmony with nature, in harmony and balance with others around you, and really being in touch with yourself and your own wisdom. That transcends any culture or country boundary, and it's really central to our own personal happiness and to, I think, our survival as a planet.
G&H is a kind of a medicine, if you want, for the illness of our times. The first message of G&H, I believe, is reconnecting with our natural environment in such a way that we acknowledge, respect, and value the sacredness of all life forms and our interconnectedness with all life forms. The second crisis that we are facing as a mankind is an economic crisis, which is actually more of an ethical, of a moral crisis than an actual economic crisis. Therefore, we see rising inequality, not only between North and South, but even within rich societies. So the second message is about creating a caring economy, an economy that is based on values like altruism and compassion, and collaboration, solidarity, rather than competition and destruction of the environment. The third message of G&H, I believe, is reconnecting with ourselves, with our deepest or highest potential, with our deepest values. Because a lot of the dissatisfaction and meaninglessness that we experience in modern life is the direct consequence of this disconnection with ourselves.
I think one reason that gross national happiness has come into the spotlight in a global way right now is because there's a collective sense that things aren't working. I don't think we would be so interested in happiness if we weren't really feeling unhappy with a lot of things right now. So I think what G&H offers is not just a cosmetic stick-on Band-Aid solution to just tweak the system a little bit. It's really questioning, why have we been chasing GDP and economic growth at all costs? And can we not balance that and look at happiness and well-being of all life as a reason and the center for development?
So we started from this more overall vision of how a country could try to develop in a different way. And then this led us to try to think which were the strongest leverage points. And we identified a number of them, but the two that we really prioritized was working with the economy, with businesses, and working in education. For two obvious reasons, right? Economy is really the leading power in modern times. So if we can have businesses and that are trying to do business differently, trying to be a force for the good in society, that's a very powerful example. And we have a number of companies, even very large companies, that we've been working with. Because, again, business people are people. So even the CEO of a company would like his his children and his grandchildren to have a good future. You know, so it is possible, despite the weight of the institution. If you can touch the heart of the people, something can happen. And we had really very moving experiences working with business people, as well in Asia, as in the US, as in Europe. And then the other part is education, for the obvious reason that what we do today will determine the society we have tomorrow. That seems quite obvious. And so we developed a program called Happy Schools, and we've implemented it in Vietnam, in Bhutan, and we had smaller programs in other countries, but these were the two countries where we had a very sort of a scaled up possibility because we were working directly with the Ministry of Education. Well, in Bhutan, it was very easy because the Minister of Education himself was really behind it, and so we could really work in all the schools. And in Vietnam, we're working with one province at this time, Central Vietnam, Hue Province, and we're in the second year of implementation. And the Minister of Education, national level, has already said that he believes that happy schools is the direction where Vietnamese schools should be going towards. So we'll see. You know, ministers say things, but then many things can happen before it actually gets implemented. But in Central Vietnam, we have implemented it. Thousands and thousands of children have gone through the program. And the program is based on 3 modules, which is, it's basically a teacher training program. Self-care, care for others and for society, and care for the environment and the planet. So the idea that, you know, that we, both my colleague Julia and myself expressed in the small video is that first we have to create those conditions that enable the child to really flourish, to really be able to manifest his full potential. And from this alignment with oneself, it is out of that, it is the basis to really create good social connection and human relationship. And we know that when we speak about happiness and well-being, the quality of human relationship is the key point. There are many factors, but the quality of your human relationship is the key point. There was this big Harvard study that went over several decades about adult life, and they had started in the early 50s, I think, following 2 groups. One were Harvard students, the other were workers from Boston, and they followed the 2 cohorts over until recently, because they published regularly, but the final publication was made recently because almost everybody had died out because of the participants. And they, you can find it on, it's published, you can find it, and they looked at the various variables, and the indicator that had the strongest impact, more, for instance, you could imagine there's a big difference between Harvard students, like the top of the crop, and like worker families in Boston. Yeah? Of course there are differences, but in the end, when you look over the whole life, in terms of psychological well-being, health, many, many different indicators were measured, then the factor that had the strongest impact was the quality of human relationship. People who felt, you know, a sense of belonging, either in a community, in a family, or these people live longer, are healthier, and all the rest of it. And we know that loneliness and isolation has become like an epidemic in our society. Yeah? So it's really that emotional and social and emotional learning is, for the time being, not really, most of the time, not really considered. Although these are competencies like, in the same way then thinking competencies, academic competencies, they have to be trained. They are, of course, there as a potential, but they need to be trained. And our care for the environment is directly connected with our capability to care. If we are like egoistic, self-centered, you know, like isolated people, why on earth should we care for a tree, a mountain, a river, or if we don't even care for the people around us? So it's really a continuum. So that's the basic idea of this program. And the specific thing about it is that what we try to do with the teachers, we don't give them a ready-made curriculum. We try to help them develop competencies, and we encourage them to find their own way to implement it. Because, you know, I guess many of you are educators, you know how it is. Every year you get a new program that you have to implement, and you can't bear it anymore, and the ministry tells you do this and do that, and the new minister comes and you have to do something else, and everybody's overworked anyway. So that doesn't really work. But touching the creativity, why did you become a teacher in the first place? Why did you want to educate kids? And creating a free space where this love for the children and deep concern for their well-being can really, you know, become creative and help it's been really life-changing for many, many of the teachers. So a few pictures from that, so that you see what it looks like. If it oh, it works and then it goes too fast. Sorry. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. Yeah, okay. So that's a group of teachers. We have a community in Vietnam, in central Vietnam, called the Peaceful Bamboo Family, where we try to sort of model what a sustainable community could look like. And then the teachers come in our community to do training. So you see, we have big groups. It's like 120 teachers at a time, every time. And then we have thousands of kids coming there. We have an organic garden. We have places where we transform what we grow in the garden. So we have a lot of activities, hands-on activities, because again, you know, kids who have never put their hands in the soil, have never seen a plant grow. You know, if you just know it from a textbook, it's not the same thing, you know. So we really create those conditions that the care for nature is born out of a real-life experience. And, you know, in the beginning, some kids don't really want to put their hands, and the mom is afraid it's dirty and you will get germs or whatever. But once they've tried it out, they all love it. They're so, you know. And the whole idea is, you know, like we have cows, and so they're doing the hay and so on. And it's all about having a direct experience and then reflecting the experience, rather than first having a theory and then trying to, right? But really starting with a full experience with all your senses, what it smells like, how it touches, how it feels, what the colors and so on. And then, but what does it mean? What is it? And so on. This inductive process rather than the usual academic deductive process. So that's been, and then they come up with their own projects. So the whole idea is empowerment, that the kids take the lead. So for instance, that was a project that these kids, they're small kids. They come up with their own idea how to reduce plastic waste. And one of the things is, you know, we go into school every morning with our, you know, snacks in a plastic bag. How about we would do our own plastic bags? Bags and paper bags, right? So they've designed their own bags, you see, and I don't know if you see it here, you have the earth, and the upper part is like dark and gray, and it's like a plastic bag, and the lower part is blue and green, and okay. So they have like slogans, and they do campaigns and like that. So they're in the driver's seat, and the teachers are facilitators, not just standing there saying, do this, don't do that, repeat after me, but really, you know, having them come up with projects. And I would like, yeah, my time is up. I would like to end with a little video of a project like that we did in Bhutan. Oh no, that's, yeah, and you know, like getting away from the sitting like you, but organizing the classroom like that, where it's all about dialogue and, you know, having a task that they have to find solutions and speaking together, teaching them how to listen to one another, simple things like that, but that makes such a difference in their lives. Yeah, so that's our adolescent class in our community. You see it doesn't have walls, so on 3 sides there are walls, but one side is open towards the garden, and so they see the garden when they sit in their classroom. Of course, Vietnam is a warm country, so we can do that. In Germany would be a bit difficult, but anyway, you could adapt it. So I'll end with a little video that shows you an example of this empowerment project.
I can and you can, together we can be the change in the world. I can and you can, together we can be the change we want to see. Feel, imagine, do your part. Feel, imagine, do.
education minister came to the school. So, if a primary school in Thimphu, one of the small, poor countries in the world, can do it, you can do it too. Thank you.
Vinh Tho, thank you so much for your keynote. We have a few minutes for questions. Who would like to pose a question? I think I'll bundle them. Are you all looking at your watches and wondering if you're going to make trains and planes and so on? Please, Ilan.
Thank you very much for a really wonderful view and an inspiring one.
Thank you.
One question is, with the schools, both how do you select and how do you help the teachers develop their approaches to this? What kinds of ways do you engage with them, and how do can they take that into other environments, other schools?
Mm-hmm. So, in Vietnam, we didn't select them. It was the Department of Education who decided, because they wanted to have a geographical coverage, so they took schools from different parts, and then they wanted to have schools that are like in very working class areas, schools that are more like, so that we have really a diversity that reflects the diversity of the population. So it was no selection process. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we try to organize the training in a way that it models what we want them to do. So we don't tell them what to do, but this way of empowering the kids, we try to role model them for that, to do that by organizing workshops that are extremely interactive and that are not top-down, and where, as I said, we try to create space for them to unleash their creativity and their ideas, because they're the experts. They know the kids. We don't know their kids. They know their kids. So, we don't come and tell them, you know what you should do, and okay, do this and that. We don't do that, but we make them attentive to certain areas and say, okay, so if we want to develop that with kids, for instance, what are the problems you are facing in the class? Let's say, okay, we have a lot of bullying, and so can we try to find solutions? What are the root causes? So the processes are very dynamic processes where they come up with their own solutions. What we do have is a follow-up in the class. So we have one module, then they implement it for about 3 months. It's 3 modules. Each module is only 3 days, not very long. Then they implement for 3 months, and our team goes in the classes, observe and support and give ideas, and then we have teachers' circles where they share what they've done. And we collect all the stories of what they've done, and we create a workbook so that everybody knows what everybody else has done. Therefore, we get a lot of material, because so many people have so great ideas if they are given the space to do it. It was only possible because the Department of Education agreed on it and gave us the space to do it. So we have a scientific follow-up or accompaniment by the University of Hue, and so they're doing the measurements and so on. It's only the end of the 2nd year, so it's relatively new, but we always have very encouraging results in terms of improvements, and both for teachers and for students. And now we also organize parents groups, because we thought it was very important that the whole ecosystem of the school is involved. And we had really moving testimonies from parents.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of hands up now. I'm going to bundle them, indeed, and I'm going to ask for short questions, if you would, because I know we do have people who do have to make transport. So here, can you raise your hands high? So the microphone carriers, and then we'll get another one to Professor Bauer, please. And I'll start with the one back here. He was waiting a bit.
Thanks. Your passion is contagious. You mentioned 2 interesting words. One was that you have a facilitator who's not training but making this environment. And you stress upon the part of economy being involved, companies. Out of curiosity, did any of these companies request Could your facilitator come over to our office and help us devise new ideas and yeah?
Okay, let's take a second one as well, and then Professor Bacher.
Thank you, this most inspiring talk. Now I learned that you come to us from Switzerland. Can you give us a hint how you would translate what you do in Vietnam in, let's say, a school in Switzerland? Or Germany, but that's semi.
Shall I go ahead? Okay, so first question, companies, yes. There are some people from Thailand here? Thailand? You know Big Rim? Yeah, so because Big Rim also co-financed the House of Little Scientists, right? So Big Rim is a company, we worked 3 years for them to try to help them improve happiness and well-being, both of their own staff and also of the stakeholders, with similar but different, because it's a company, it's not kids. So, and now, and that jumps to Switzerland, we're doing that with SIG, which is Service Industriel de Genève. It's the company that provides Geneva with electricity, internet, waste management, and water. And we've started a GNH program for this company. But that's a whole big theme, the companies. But yes, there are a number of companies doing that. For now, we are working in Switzerland with the Department of Education of Canton de Vaud, so Canton Waadt for the German speakers, which is western Switzerland, Geneva Lake area, and we're starting in 2020 to implement that with a number of pilot, and it's not small kids, it's secondary schools, so college it's called in Switzerland. It's like 15, 16 years old. So we have a contract with the Department of Education of the canton to do that. And because it's not a ready-made curriculum, but it's more like putting the attention on certain areas and helping teachers find their own solution, it's very easy to transfer. Because it's not that we have a Vietnamese program, then we have to translate it into a Swiss program, but we have fundamentally these 3 big areas of focus. And of course, the problems are different in Switzerland than in Vietnam, but yes and no, you know, because fundamentally we're humans. So the cultural, yes, plays a role, but I think time has come to go beyond the differences and just become aware we are co-responsible. Our brothers and sisters are 7 billion people, not just the people in my country or my religion or my this or my that, because either we'll make it all together or we'll disappear, all of us, no matter what religion, country, and passport we have. So for me, that's very like trying to touch what is universally human. And it's easier than one would think, my experience.
Thank you very much. I think we could take maybe one more. I'm not sure we can manage 2. Did I see one hand go? Just let me check, because I thought I saw a hand go up back here. No? Okay. Then, yeah, please go ahead.
So thank you very much for the talk. I like the idea of well-being for all, and I'd like to ask how you go on with conflicting issues. Let me give a short example. People like growing flowers in their garden, and they like to grow flowers with filled blossoms because they are more attractive than the wild species they were cultivated from. So people like these flowers, but insects don't like it because they don't provide pollen for the insects. So what are you doing with conflicting issues, and how do you do decision making, especially if it goes to school issues?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the whole GNH process is a co-creation process based on dialogue, because we necessarily have conflicting opinions and interests and ideas and so on. The question is whether we learn to create social spaces for open dialogue where people can share their concerns and issues and try to find a common solution that will never be perfect. For instance, recently I was speaking with a German politician. She's an Abgeordnete in European Parliament, from the Grünen, for the Green Party, and she was telling me they are having arguments about, is it better to have organic food that comes from far away, or to have non-organic food that is local? You see, and you can really have valid points for both, right? And there's so many of these issues, or your flower example, but for me the question is more, we will never have a perfect solution. So we're not looking for perfection. We're looking, what is the next small step we can do in the right direction? And how can we create social spaces where people are allowed to raise their voice? Because if we want to have empowerment of the children, we also have to have empowerment of the citizens. So it's the whole system needs empowerment. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us. Vinh Tho.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for moderating.